Hi, I'm Libby Cornish from Decadent Alternatives. Welcome to my fourth video in my online gluten-free baking classes. Today we are going to do savoury short crust pastry. Now, the previous video we did a sweet short crust pastry that had a bit of baking powder in it to give it a little lift. In this short crust pastry recipe, I've added in maize starch, or that's corn flour from corn, and that'll make it slightly shorter, and I think it's a great one to use with savouries like quiches. So we have the dry ingredients: Baker's Magic flour, some maize starch with salt added, and then we have some butter, an egg, and hot water. Basically, it's a melt and mix, and we are going to combine those, and I've already blitzed this in a food processor, and I have melted the butter and added in hot water. And all I need to do is add the egg. I will put that away and whisk it. Now you want this mix to be hot. You don't want it to cool down, because the flour, Baker's Magic flour, really likes the warmth, and you get a lot more flexibility in this case. Whisk this until you can see that the butter has emulsified in and it's not too oily. Pour it in, scrape out if necessary, and mix with a spoon. Now, if you'll notice, once again, it is a very, very wet mix to start off with. You don't want to do this, you don't want to mix it in a machine, because it will overmix it. Now you probably, and that is basically it. You can probably see that it is actually quite greasy. And this is warm. So basically you'll put it in between Glad Wrap, or you can use beeswax sheets and cool it down for about 30 minutes. So I have already done that, and I will get my baking sheet out, my baking mat. If you haven't watched the first video or the third video with the sweet short crust, you'll know that it comes out, the pastry is actually really quite hard and brittle, and it will still be quite greasy on the outside. Basically, we want to break this up and knead it. And you might think, how are you going to get pastry out of this? But believe me, it just likes to be kneaded, and then you'll have a good flexible dough. Now, with wheat-based, most of the recipes that use wheat flour have been designed to either develop gluten or actively avoid gluten development. Short crust pastry is one of those that it actively avoids developing gluten. So basically, you can put it up to me, thanks. Basically, when you start the recipe with wheat, you coat all of the flour with butter, and that's to stop the gluten development when you add in your egg and your water. The other thing that you do is that you then rest it in the fridge, and that is so that any gluten that you have developed basically in the first stage can relax. Because there's no gluten in the flour, we don't need to worry about that. And it's basically just give it a nice knead and then roll it out. So with this, because you can shape it any way you want it, I'm actually going to put it into a quiche dish, so a round one. With this pastry mat, you can actually see the size of the circle that you're making. The other thing that we want to be able to do is roll it out relatively thin. We want to be able to roll it out relatively thin. So I use my baking spacers. So I've got a set of 3 of these, 1, 2, and 3 mils. These are the 3 mil ones. Then you put them on either side of your pastry. Your rolling pin can straddle both, and you can make a lovely thin pastry all the same size. Before I get on to doing that, I'll actually put the other baking mat over the top so that I can roll it out with ease. Just move those. So and if you know the size of your dish, then you can roll out to the circles basically that are for that size, bearing in mind that you will need some for the going up the sides of the dish. So that one's rolled out there. I'm going to put the side, my 3 mil spacers on the side. Make sure it actually covers that. Go from the middle and push out. Go from the middle and push out, basically. And you can trim away any of that pastry that's not needed. Any of the pastry that doesn't get used, you can freeze away and use later. When I'll take off the top mat and then flip it and then take off the bottom mat. It's just easier to get it off. Now, when we're actually baking it, we don't blind bake as we would normally do with the baking paper on top of the pastry and rice or a weight to have down. This actually doesn't work for this pastry. So basically, you can pre-bake once you've got it into your quiche dish, you pre-bake for about 15 minutes. And you'll notice that the pastry actually moves away from, the pastry shrinks. You don't have to worry that this is going to make the pastry tough. That's not the case. It just all basically shrinks away from the edges. And I have I have one here that you can actually see. You can actually pick it up, basically. But what we'll do is I'll put this one away. What we are going to do is put some of this pastry in here. Now we'd normally grease the base of that pan. I actually think it's still okay enough. have a look at how far, whether it's going to go up the edges, and that's fine. I'm going to tear off some of this pastry because it is not needed. And Then I'll tear off some of this here as well. Then to lift up off the pastry mat, get one end, put your rolling pin, drape it over, and give it a roll, and you should be able to pick it up. Maneuver your dish into space, into the place, and bring it down. Roll it over. Bring it up to get the pastry at the edges of the base and on the side. The other thing that you are going to want to do is prick the base. Before I've just realized I don't have a knife to actually cut off I'll use the fork, cut off the excess pastry. That pastry there can all be used basically for something else. You could do mini tarts with it if you don't want to freeze it away. Then that will go into this pastry case, will go into the fridge for 10 minutes and then baked at 180 degrees for 15 minutes. Now and then filled with your favorite quiche middle. I have this is one I baked tonight, and that is spinach, bacon, marinated goat's cheese with a couple of pine nuts on the top, and that is what I made with this short crust pastry. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.